toddlers.
This is Good Morning Mumbai with Hrishi K.
All right.
We're streaming audio online all over the nation. www.onecast.in, numeral 1cast.in, 94.3 on the FM band and your radio sets right here in Mumbai City. And only if you're not driving, statutory warning, you're in the backseat of a radio taxi, a chauffeur-driven car, at home, at work. You want to stream some video, it's facebook.com/radio1.mum. Pleased to welcome the absolute living legend, Yo-Yo Ma. What's up? Great to see you.
Hey, I am so excited to be in the studio with you because I had a fantastic day in Mumbai. I just saw some amazing people, met some amazing people, and I'm dying to talk to you about it.
But you're over from the worldly Koliwada, and these were the first few villages that came up, after which the big metropolis, the big giant that you see here, which is Mumbai City, came up. So these are practically the original inhabitants of Mumbai and their descendants. And tell me about the time you had at the Worli Koliwada, the fishing village.
Well, I essentially showed up in one of the open spaces, and there was like a little stage, and I started meeting various people in the community who, there was the rock star, the man who actually sings about, he sang a song that his grandfather taught him about fishing, and he really is a rock star. I mean, he just commands everything around. But then there were these children around, and there was one kid who was playing like a tiny kind of tabla like instrument. He's very good, very, very, very deft fingers, and there was another kid who said he wanted to try to play the cello. And so we started playing, and there was a guitarist, and just gradually various people showed up, and there was one additional person after another. And it's the most magical thing is that music started happening, and then a trumpet player came, but he didn't have his trumpet, and then his trumpet came a little bit later, and then there were these. There was probably like a 1.5-year-old who was there clapping his hands, and eventually, many members of the community showed up. We stopped for a little bit because there was a funeral, and so everybody was quiet and respectful. It was, I think, for me, I feel like I got a window into a community, in a day's work. It's like I had such wonderful interactions, little conversations, the relationships between the rock star and his granddaughter, whom he really wanted a photo. It's like really sweet interactions that are completely genuine because they've never seen a cello before, and for me to kind of try and scratch away at something and either try to join in or not while sweating away because it was hot, and was wonderful. And this is after walking through the streets and hearing about what needs to be done in order, one, for people that actually, like the people who first were there, to be able to stay in the communities, and how to deal with change. And I thought what G5A, which is the organization that is doing some wonderful work in that community, I thought that their approach was something that I would do anywhere with musicians or community members. They went and talked to really all the representatives of the community. This is like 5 years ago, over 100 people, all the stakeholders, to say, what do you want? What is it that you wish? And we know that waste is a big issue, and so and the rock star wrote a song about waste, right? So this is totally using the talents of the community. In this case, this is this wonderful musician, singer, who decided, well, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to sing about fishing. I'm going to sing about what our community represents, and just getting people to think about waste. And then now, the next phase is to actually build kind of a way for people to dispose of waste, but to then use it to create, you know, growing food or whatever.
To recycle it.
To recycle. That's right. And I think, you know, for a community to take charge of its own destiny, and when there are obviously many issues to confront, I think is so incredibly inspiring. And to meet people who are engaged in this work with, you know, with full head and heart and soul is, I think it's beautiful to see, and to use, you know, among other things, music or the spoken word, or to whatever way there is to bring people together. I think that's a great use of art and the expressive arts to help a society just communicate with one another as to what their hopes and wishes are, and then to spur into action.
I saw the joy in your face when you mentioned seeing some talented kids at the Koliwada, at the early Koliwada. You yourself were quite a child prodigy. A little birdie tells me that you were 7 and you played in front of President John F. Kennedy. You have any memories of that? I mean, I know it's another lifetime away.
Well, you know, as a 7-year-old and as a new immigrant from France to the United States, my parents went to France to study from China and stayed there for decades. So I was newly arrived, and I knew that President Kennedy was an important person, but I was fascinated by Danny Kaye, who was the actor, and he was conducting an orchestra, and he's an actor, comedian, and he had such a way with just making the orchestra do funny things. I thought, I want to grow up to be this guy. And so it's only later that I appreciated the gravity of you know, having performed for President Kennedy.
And is it true that the cello wasn't your first choice of instrument? You were actually picking up the violin, you were playing a bit of the violin, and then you eventually got onto the viola and then the cello.
Well, the problem is, I think, you know, people talk about musical talent as if it's like a static thing. Here's musical talent, here's, you know, mathematical talent, and actually I've come to believe that people have also a physicality that makes them want to be either a tabla player or sarangi player or a keyboard player. That I was not good on the violin, and so my parents thought I was not talented until I made the fatal mistake of saying one day I wanted to play the biggest instrument there was, which was the double bass, but I was still too little to play the double bass, and the cello was a compromise. So I play the cello for very deep philosophical reasons.
Beautiful. 18 Grammy Awards, and we're just around the corner from another Grammy ceremony. Which of them would be closest to your heart, be really special? I know it's a difficult question. It's like asking you which of your kids you choose. I mean, having 18 of those awards.
Well,
but what would be special?
There was a massive sale of Grammys, so I just picked up, you know, all of them at a tag sale, and so.
Oh, to wish it was so easy.
So it's like having 18 children. They're all special. They're all above average.
But there must be one ceremony, maybe that, or two of them that you went to. You know, somebody said something about you, or maybe the person who presented them to you would be special. Some memory that comes back.
Well, I think, you know, so I'm friends with James Taylor, and occasionally, you know, we do things together. And I remember that he was asked to perform at the Grammy. He asked me to play something with him, and that was pretty special to play with a friend, and also I think I brought my daughter to it, and she really wanted to go to the Grammys because, you know, she was at an age sort of early teenager, and so that was pretty special, and sitting, you know, up there and watching all the people that she loves and perform it made a father very, very happy.
Hearing you, even though you play a cello, which is a traditional classical instrument, the beauty of your collaborations is something that's stunning, and we're very lucky in India now through Apple Music and streaming services to get your collaborative work. Your collaborations, you just briefly mentioned James Taylor. I mean, he's a country artist. You've gone on and collaborated with him. Carlos Santana, who's basically a rock artist, to go and collaborate with him. Bobby McFerrin, who's a jazz vocalist. So I want you to spend a little time talking about these wonderful collaborations of yours, of mainstream artists.
Well, I think I think of all the streams that run into the Ganga.
Wow.
Right? I mean, and music is the Ganga. And basically, all these other genres are just streams of water. It's the same thing. It's just comes from a slightly different place, and we end up all in the sea, right? I mean, and that's so, and it comes from high up in the mountains, for inspiration, for whatever, and I think that for where I think music and science has a lot in common is that people use sounds or specific sounds or rhythms to actually express in code what happens in our inner lives. So I think you listen to a rock musician that is inspired by root music, right? And you get to something about that root turn them into a musician. The contemporary form of expression after a certain time was rock music. Same thing with jazz. It came from places where they had dances, and then there was you add sort of a different form of rhythm, and then slowly it morphed into jazz. Every genre we have was invented, and it's just about actually tracking what happened and how it happened. But basically people are trying to express human thoughts and ideas and emotions, and I think that's the part I'm really interested in, is to figure out who's doing what and why and then how, right? So as a musician, it's like sort of saying you're a molecular biologist, and I'm going to look at DNA, I'm going to look at all the different ways that affects who we are. And music, you can do that in sound, and for me that's infinitely fascinating.
Well, another one of my favorites is Sting, and at
he's
the Winter Olympics, you did a collaboration, the two of you.
Yes.
What kind of a person is he?
Well, he's first of all, he is in great physical shape, which makes me feel terrible, because I mean he really is in great shape. But believe it or not, he also plays the cello. So he took my cello in his hand, and then he started playing, the first Bach suite, and he started playing, a little bit of the Elgar Concerto, and he's a very, very fine musician, and we spoke a while ago, and we may do something or may not or whatever, but I have a lot of respect for his musicianship, in addition to the fact that he's in great physical shape.
Well, that's yoga.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you just mentioned a Bach suite, and you have the Bach project. What really is Yo-Yo Ma's Bach project? Tell our listeners about that.
Well, so for cello, the Bach solo suites, of which there's 6, are sort of like, climbing the Himalayas. It's their the depth of what they go to, and also the challenge of being able to create a lot of different lines on on an instrument that usually doesn't play many lines at the same time is a challenge. It's a physical challenge. It's a musical challenge. But the reason I am doing this project is because I feel that there's a need in our world for people to help one another more. And this music I've lived with since I was 4 years old. I'm 63, so I've been playing it for 59 years. And throughout the 59 years, this music has been incredibly helpful to me as I go through, the different phases of life. I'm confused. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm looking for meaning in life. This music centers me, and I think so. Bach is one of those composers. I think of him as a scientist musician, and the reason is that I think he does both objectivity and empathy at the same time, and he doesn't put himself at the center of the universe. So somehow that makes him a great companion to listen to, because wait a minute, you want someone, if you need help, to listen to you and to be sympathetic, but you also want them to have a different perspective. Total empathy, it says, like, I understand your pain, then what? But it says, wait a minute, think about things in another way, and that combination makes it really special. And so what I wanted to do, since this is what I do, I wanted to go around the world to say, every place has invented things that are special to the location. So that's, you go deep enough, if it's good enough, it actually belongs not only to the local place, but also to the world. And I think there are many, many things and ways of thinking that we need to discover that have been helpful to people. And I want to go through 36 of those places on 6 continents in order to start conversations with people, and essentially with the hope and the hopefully conviction of claiming that culture, the totality of what gets us to understand our environment, ourselves, and others, actually can help us imagine a better future. And I think there's nothing more important for me at my late age to consider and to try and actually bring 2 great passions of my life together into one project.
I'm going to go back to when I was just out of a high school and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out. And I remember buying the CD and listening to it on my CD player and going, whoa. And then, that brings me to your work with John Williams. And then I went back and I heard 7 Years in Tibet. And then, more recently, Memoirs of a Geisha. There's obviously something special whenever John Williams calls and you get into the studio to do a background score, a BGM. And talk us through that, please.
Well, I think John Williams, first of all, is a great musician. And he's someone who actually, in his musical mind, encompasses all the genres that exist. I mean, he just really knows his stuff. And he was I think he, whether it's musical theater or jazz or whatever, he knows Elgar, he knows Walton, and he's a good friend. He shows up at Tanglewood, which is the summer home of the Boston Symphony, every summer, and over the last 25 years or so, we've spent time together, and he writes specifically for people. So he has a very close relationship with Steven Spielberg, so he writes, but he also writes for the subject of the films. He writes for specific members of orchestras that he conducts, concertos, because he likes those people. And so a relationship with him is a wonderful thing to be kind of, the object of his attention. To say, oh, you play the cello. I like the way you play. I'm going to write for you. So it's very personal, and what I love about playing film music is that you're part of a much larger team of people than I'm usually associated with. An orchestra has maybe 90, 100 people, but a film could have hundreds of people, and somehow that collaborative thing is something that I really love, and so what I'm doing with the Bach project is another form of collaboration, and it's, yes, with other musicians, because they're great musicians everywhere, but it's also with communities, and really trying to kind of understand and then maybe collaborate in some form, so that the totality of people working together is greater than what any one person or one sector can do on their own.
I left out Master and Commander there in that filmography. Another beautiful one.
You're
I'm going to stay with the
you're a film
movies.
buff.
I'm going to stay with the movies simply because, here are all these spaghetti westerns, Ennio Morricone.
Yes.
And, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, Few Dollars More. Clint Eastwood became an overnight sensation. But all those films, and then eventually Once Upon a Time in America and The Untouchables, were standout BGMs. If you could move away from the charisma of Clint Eastwood, you would see that the music spoke a language of its own. Again, Yo-Yo Ma and Ennio Morricone, that collaboration.
Well, Ennio Morricone is probably one of the most inspired melodists. I think, believe it or not, my wife and I, we are moved every time we hear one of his tunes. I mean, they can be so incredibly uplifting, and in some ways it's the best of what Italians are, in terms of just celebrating all of life in all of its forms, right? And I think, whether it's humanity or life in nature, there's this incredible generosity that's in opera, that's in the way people are, and Morricone, I think, takes that in, but he also gets to the sort of first principles of music. I remember his saying, music is time, space, and energy.
Wow.
And this is an 80-year-old saying this with all the force of, vigor of life. And it's wonderful. I never forgot that. And in fact, it is totally true. That's exactly what music is. And from these three things, you have an infinite number of ways to express what is inside people.
I'm going to come back to your Mumbai trip. It's wonderful that at the G5A, there are artists already in residence, and you're going to be there watching over them. There are also some storytellers and poets, and it's so wonderful that they get an opportunity to meet somebody of your stature. I mean, they're going to be telling their grandchildren about this, saying Yo-Yo Ma was in the audience, maybe he came up and played a bit with us, gave us a few tips. So the fact that you're going into a community and seeing those artists in residence.
Oh gosh, I have to say, this is today one of the reasons I was so excited was that I actually visited G5A earlier before we went to Colorado, and met some of the musicians, and actually met the people that started G5A, and I think you have a number of visionaries that, and by visionaries, that you take a chance to create something that you think is going to work. There are not too many examples you can draw from to say, oh yes, it's that model or that model. No, you're not replicating something, but you're taking a collection of experiences and you're saying, I'm going to create a safe space for people to be vulnerable enough to be willing to create even when you don't know the other person. So that takes the atmosphere of trust. So whether you walk into the building and you immediately feel that, because there's not, when you're creating, you can't have the usual hierarchies of society. You actually have to have a flat hierarchy. You try things, you're not going to be judged. You're safe so that you can try anything and then to see whether it works. So it's a combination of trying experiments and people using all of their experiences to be able to make music happen. So today, I met musicians that never met until like yesterday or today, and in 1 hour, they actually created, whether it's a rapper or someone who is a Sufi singer or a jazz musician or a great sitar player, or and someone from Kashmir, really speaking with such passion in the singer-songwriter form, the words that meant so much to but in sound it became so expressive. It was an amazing moment for me to be in that space. I think for someone like me, I just go crazy and think, give me more. And tomorrow night we're going to actually have a moment where these musicians will perform, and we will actually hear spoken word, and it's going to be I think it's going to be amazing. It's going to start at 4, and it's music starts a little later, and but it's going to be a real community experience where I think everybody is welcome.
There's a lot of respect for President Obama in this country. We wish we could say the same about your current president, but it's wonderful that you were on his committee for the humanities and arts, and you also got a Medal of Freedom, and you must have really enjoyed working with President Obama.
Well, I think one of the things that makes President Obama special is that because, well, there are many things that make him special, but I think one of the things that is not said that often is that he grew up in several different places, whether it's Hawaii or in Indonesia and whatever, and that so that he actually understands the world in a multi-perspective way, even though he became the United States president. And what I think makes that really interesting is that at its best, the United States is a pluralistic country, and if it fulfills all of its potential, it's how you actually are able to draw from the strengths of the pluralistic community. I think President Obama really understood that, and he could speak to that. He also had, the mind to be able to make things very clear and to inspire that kind of thinking. So it made a lot of Americans really proud to be part of a system that wanted to encourage that. And I think he's one of the few presidents that actually has had that kind of experience, with the possible exception of some of the very early presidents.
Well, last couple of questions before we wrap. Do you have any nicknames for your cello?
Well, I have one cello I play on is nicknamed Petunia, and the reason was that I was in Salt Lake City, Utah, and talking to a group of high school kids, and someone asked me, "Do you have a name for your cello?" I said, "No, not really, but if you think of a name, and I'll play you something, and maybe I'll play you something in a second." And after I played something, she said, and her name's Brittany, I still remember, she said Petunia. I said, "Great, that's the name of my cello."
Beautiful.
So I'll play you something.
My last question before we get you to play something.
Yeah.
What is your advice to all those kids out there who are going to the Juilliards, who are going to the Trinity College of Music, who are passionate about the cello or the violin, young kids listening to this broadcast? What is your advice to them?
Well, actually, I think that my advice to anybody who plays an instrument is to say that the sounds you make are actually sounds that if you put 2 or 3 sounds together, your timing, your physicality of how you approach the instrument is unique to you. It's like a fingerprint.
Wow.
And so treasure that. So when you play something, make sure that you actually know what you want to hear first before you make the sound. So you're actually reaching for that sound. And if it's an emotion or a character, reach for that. So I think it's really important to realize that we learn technique. It's like learning words in order to transcend it, to get to content. So never to forget that while you're working on technique, working on sentence structure, how to write a paragraph, never forget what your point is, right? And that's the same for living. What's your point? What is the meaning that you're going for? And if you do that, inevitably, the sounds that come out are going to approximate that meaning that you had in your mind.
Beautiful. Can we have you play some for us? What an honor.
Sure. I'll play you the prelude of the first suite, which was the first piece of music I learned when I was 4.
Lovely. Thing of beauty, sire. Thank you. What an honor.
Thank you so much.